Class, how are you? Hope you all are doing well. Today we are going to be discussing the Great Migration and issues that are filed under the topic of migration. So I'll share my screen and you can find this um, PowerPoint on Canvas. So first of all, we're going to talk about migration in the early 1900s. And I'm not going to give you too much history, but we're going to talk about migration from 1900s to approximately 1929, 1930. So it's said that 1.5 million Mexicans crossed into the United States between 1900 and 1930. So below you see a couple of laws and acts that were enacted. For example, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. You have the 1907 Gentlemen's Agreement Act that had to do with Japanese Americans, which we'll learn about later on in the semester. You have the 1913 California Alien Land Law. Um, and we're not going to discuss those today, but just so you know, between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, you have all these laws that sort of prevent migration into the United States. During the early 1900s, a lot of Mexicanos, a lot of Mexicans were allowed to come to the United States. There wasn't no stopping them. Um, when the Chinese Exclusion Act happened in 1882, a lot of Chinese were actually coming into the United States via Mexico. So they were trading their traditional gowns and hats and whatever they were wearing to traditional Mexican attire and hats. In other words, they were dressing up as Mexicans and crossing the border because Mexicans were allowed to come into this country, whereas Chinese were not, which is a very interesting fact. Why do so many Mexicans come from 1900, especially in the year 1910 and 19 and through 1920? But why do so many come between 1900 and 1930? The big reason and the big answer is because of the Mexican Revolution. So let me give you a brief history of the Mexican Revolution. In the late 1800s, we in Mexico had a president, or rather, I should call it dictator, by the name of Porfirio Diaz. And what happened was he decided to rule the country in benefit of himself and in benefit of foreigners. So what that means is that there's a saying, he was a stepmother, or he was the mother of foreigners and the stepmother to Mexicans. He had this saying called pan or palo, bread or stick. You either give you what I offer or you're going to take the stick, right? So in other words, you go against me, you're going to get dealt with. He was a horrible president. He did a couple good things and like start the railroad system and the telegraph and among other things in Mexico, but it was always at the expense of the indigenous and the peasant population and community in Mexico. So just to summarize, horrible dictator. We're not supposed to have dictators in Mexico. In fact, presidents only lasted 4 years back then. Now they last 6. Back then it was 4 years, but he changed laws so that you couldn't kick him out of the presidential seat. So he's president for 3 decades, dictator. He did not invest any money in Mexico. Bottom line is the Mexican Revolution, which is a civil war in Mexico. In other words, the peasants and the poor population and the indigenous fighting against the government is a result of his governing Mexico. So they were essentially fighting the president. So the Mexican Revolution happens. And the reason so many people migrate out of Mexico is actually really interesting. You have, the government's army, and then you have the peasant army, and they're fighting against each other. But we forget about this middle class that exists in Mexico. In Mexico, you have a middle class that really didn't have a say or a take in which side they were on. I mean, they weren't really on the poor people's side because the poor people are suffering and dying every day. But the middle class is not suffering and dying every day. So they don't really, they don't really understand the plea of the poor. And also, they're not really on the rich side either because they're not rich enough to be rich. So they don't make that much money. So they're kind of in the middle, in the middle class, right? And once the war started happening, if you live in Santa Ana, for example, and the president's army gets there, then all men that live in Santana have to join his army. Your brother lives in, I don't know, Whittier. The Emiliano Zapata's army gets there. Now your brother is fighting for Emiliano Zapata, right? So now actually it's like family versus family, whether you like it or not. Whether you're for the Zapatistas or for the, you know, the poor army or for the government's army, right? It didn't matter. It's like whoever got there first. In other words, these armies were sort of like ripping families apart, and it was a bad situation, especially for women who were sometimes like left behind, raped or killed once they were left behind. So let's get back to this point. The middle class knew that this was happening, and rather than getting their family ripped apart, or rather than being forced to go into this war, which they didn't have a stake in, they decided to up and migrate north and leave out of Mexico into the United States. Some people, historians, claim that this is why there's no middle class in Mexico today. It all stems from that one migration. So many people left because they were afraid of fighting in this war that didn't have anything really to do with them, right? Imagine if a war breaks out between like the left and the right here in the United States, and maybe some of you are like, I don't really care. I mean, yeah, I guess, you know, like Trump, whatever. I'm not even mad at him. Yeah, I guess there's like Black Lives Matter, but I'm not even into that. You know, you're just kind of like floating along in the middle, not really choosing a side and not really caring. And all of a sudden, these two sides are fighting. Like, how are you gonna feel? And that's exactly what happened to a lot of Mexicanos who were in the middle class in the early 1900s. So if you look at Mexico now, you have rich people and you have very, very poor people. 9 out of 10 indigenous people in Mexico are impoverished, right? In other words, they're super poor. So you have like they don't know what they're gonna eat the next day. Very poor people in Mexico, and then very rich, and there's like not much of a middle class that exists in Mexico. And some historians would claim that might be due to the fact that a lot of them just up and left. So huge migration. Usually the word great migration is designated to like migration from Africa after slavery and all that. But I also use it here in the migration from Mexico. So let's talk about that. 1.5 million people come over, and then we have the stock. And the reason it stops at 1929, 1930 is because that's when the stock market crash happens. And the United States and the government blame Mexico for that. Sorry, Mexicans for that, even though they have nothing to do with the stock market. But they scapegoated Mexican, and they deported. Some people say up to 1 million people, but between 400 and 500,000. So around 500,000 to 1 million people were repatriated back to Mexico, right? So they're sent over. That's why the migration stops. Like, why are you going to migrate to Mexico in 1930 when people are getting sent back, right? So there's a lot of slides here. I think 40 something slides. We're going to skip most of them and talk about um, some of the issues. We're going to skip some of these. Let's see. Let's talk about push pull factors. And let me explain this because I think it was I don't know if it was really clear in the PowerPoint, so I need to, explain this to you. By push pull factors, I mean what pushes people out of Mexico or Central America, especially. Today we're really going to talk mostly about Central America. What pushes people out of El Salvador, for example, and what pulls people into the United States. So there's policies in the United States that sort of like will lure you in, and there's issues going on back at home which kind of like push you out, right? So that's what I mean by push pull factor. So let's go over some of them. The US launched a public information campaign to warn potential migrants about the dangers of the journey north. So they denied smugglers' claims, because a lot of coyotes or smugglers would claim that if you made it north, you would be granted asylum or refugee status, which is not the case. I don't want to say 100% false, but you can get to the border. You don't have to be on the north side. You could be on either side of the border. You get to the border and you can apply for asylum or refugee status because you're being persecuted in your hometown. Maybe your entire family got killed because of something your uncle did, or maybe just because of where you live. And so you go try to seek help in the United States. The there's about a 3 year, 4 year wait period for you to get asylum. And after you wait 3, 4, some people wait less, some people wait up to like 5, 6 years. There's like over a 90 something percent chance that you won't get it. So if you ever heard the when people say, hey, my uncle came the right way, my grandpa came the right way, why can't you immigrants do the same thing? Oh my, people that say that, it it angers me because they don't they don't know the history. They don't understand. They do not understand how hard it is to gain like citizenship or asylum here in the United States. And you can say, well, my parents did it. Yeah, your parents did it 30, 40 years ago, 50, 60 years ago, your grandparents or whatever. Right now, if you're being persecuted because there's a huge narco fight in Sinaloa or whatever, wherever you live, and you're trying to find asylum and help, otherwise your kids are dying every day, and you want to find help here in the United States, there's a there's a long wait. And after you wait, they make you like go back often. After you wait for those results, there's over a 90% chance that you won't make it. So what are you supposed to do as a person who's like fleeing for their life? People don't come to the United States because, hey, you know what? Like, I make $10 an hour in Mexico, but I think I could make 17 in California. Let me know. People are who are leaving Mexico is because they don't even have the job, right? There's a lot of jobs at the border that are making $1.50, $2 an hour. Milk still costs the same in Mexico as it does here. That's why we don't even drink milk out there. If you're making $2 an hour, you're gonna go buy a $4 or $5 gallon of milk. That's like if we're making $10 an hour here, that's like a $30 gallon of milk. No one's gonna buy that, right? People are impoverished out there in Mexico, and the people that have those $2 an hour jobs, they're not even fleeing. It's the people that don't have any work. And you can see, well, that's a effed up country out there. That's a messed up third world country. The reason it's like that is because of the policies that we in the United States have enacted on Mexico and on El Salvador and on Honduras and on all these places. You have to understand that the reason people leave El Salvador is because of the United States. We went over there and we messed things up for people so bad that they have to come to the United States. They have to leave. We mess up the situation in Mexico so bad, especially with the signing of NAFTA and with other engagements, like even the Bracero program. So we'll talk about that for 1 second. The Bracero program in the 1940s brought over 4.2 million men from Mexico. Some of them, a lot of them married with kids. Promised them money, enough money to send back home. And after a couple of years of helping us in the US, because we need help with farm workers, you get to go back home and, a lot of money in your pocket. Totally wrong. In fact, people made so little that one, you couldn't send money back home, but two, you don't even have enough money to get on a train to go back home. 4.2 million men. Imagine all those kids left behind, fatherless. Now their mom has to go off and work. So those kids now really don't no longer have a father, and their mom is never at home because she has to work, right? All these agreements with the US that mess up a country like Mexico. And NAFTA, we're not even going to talk about NAFTA today, but that messes up Mexico big time. Big time. It causes, like, maybe we'll go up because we skipped this slide. If you want to learn about NAFTA, it's right there. I think we also do that at the end of the semester. Between 1980 and 1990, and in that decade, you have less than 2 million people. The 4 years after NAFTA, so in that decade, you have 2 million people total in 10 years that migrate to the United States. Right after NAFTA happens, in those 4 years, you have 3 million people. Think about those numbers. You went from 180,000 people a year to almost 600 to almost 900,000 to almost 1 million people migrating per year after NAFTA is signed. After NAFTA is signed. The Trump administration to restrict green cards for those likely to receive public assistance. This was what Trump was saying a couple of years ago. The Trump administration says that nearly 200,000 Salvadorans must leave. So we'll talk about that in a second. But there was a huge earthquake in El Salvador. What was it, 1980 something? People were displaced, and the United States took them in. So there's people who were allowed to come in. Like refugee status. Your country is literally crap because of this giant earthquake that crushed the entire country. So we're gonna let you come here for a while, like I forget what the temporary residents here in the United States, right? In the early 80s. So Trump, towards the end of his presidency or middle of his presidency, wanted to send all those people back. Some of those people are grandparents now, like kids born in the US, grandkids born in the US. What? Imagine, like, get out of here. Your time's up. Hey, everything's better. The earthquake ended. Buildings are starting to go up 30 years later. Time's up. Go back to El Salvador. And he claimed that was going to happen. 200,000 Salvadorans that were allowed here are going to have to go back. I don't know where he said that because he wanted support for his wall. That I don't know. And I knew that wasn't going to happen. I had a lot of students that were scared. I said, hey, he's just talking because, like every other politician, not just him, bro, Obama, Clinton, Bushes, everybody, they just talk, right? Don't be scared. This guy wants to send all the Salvadorians back to El Salvador if he doesn't get funding for his wall. That anyway, we don't want to talk about that wall. So back to this topic. So the United States said, don't listen to these smugglers. You don't get refugee status here in the United States, right? Obama administration also scaled up its capacity to detain arrivals by opening new facilities. And, we started talking about kids in cages during the Trump administration, and it came out and they didn't do anything about it. And there's still kids in cages now and families broken up. But he wasn't the first, Obama did it too. People have always been doing that. It's just that, like, things are more known now. And this is what really pissed me off when we found out there was kids in cages. There was a lot of people on the right or Trump supporters. Whatever you want to call them, I don't even care. Like, I don't even understand what a Trump supporter is now. He's not even the president. So how are you a Trump supporter? Like, my neighbor has a Trump 2020 sign. What? It's 2021, first of all. Like, what's the point of your sign? I mean, you mow your lawn every week. You maintain that. Why don't you maintain that sign and take it down because it's old? He had a sign that said, enough of the bullshit, Trump 2020. And oh man, I don't know if somebody told him something, but he took that one down and put up a new one that didn't have any curse words in it. So people like him usually snap back and say, Obama had those kids in cages too. I was like, wait, that's not the point. Do you think kids should be in cages? Then let's stop this, right? Then let's stop this. It's kind of ridiculous to say, oh, well, yeah, Trump has kids in cages, but Obama was the first one to do it, or Obama had him too. It's like, well, that's not the point. The point is there are kids in cages. Let's get them out of cages and reunited with families. Deport them, do whatever you need to do, but let's bring them back to, don't be separating families. That's the worst thing you could do, right? The Mexican Southern Border Plan, the Programa Frontera del Sur, significantly stepped up immigration enforcement along its border with Guatemala. That means apprehensions at the U.S. border fell and apprehensions in Mexico rose significantly. So here are some study questions that we can talk about. What are some causes of Salvadoran migration? Is it better to call these people migrants or refugees? Because are they really just migrating or are they leaving refugees, right? Based on their reasons for leaving Central America. Who is mostly migrating? Is it mothers? Is it young men? Is it children? And from the book that you're reading, as you get to know Lourdes, the mother of Enrique, do you believe that she regrets her decision to leave Enrique? This is a very important question. It's very important. I think maybe I'll just give you the answer now. And that I've seen. There's parents, and we're going to make one issue right here that I really need to say. When kids were found to be in cages and families separated, I saw this a lot on Facebook. People saying, well, I blame the parents. I blame the parents of those kids. Like, who in their right mind would let their kid leave by themselves? Because some of these kids were alone, right, with no parents. Who in their right mind would let their kids leave by themselves? So here's what I have to say about that. Here's the answer that I always gave everybody. And I always shut them up with this answer because they have no comeback. They have nothing to say. And it's sad that a lot of people don't inform themselves. Like, my opinion is, if you have something to say, you make sure like you've read a book on it or an article. Don't just talk nonsense, because then other people will believe you. And anyway, so when people say these kids at the border is sad, but it's their parents' fault, this is what I say. If your best option, being in Salvador or Mexico, if your best option is to send your kid with a smuggler or a coyote, knowing well that there's like a 50% chance that he or she is going to get raped or killed or whatever, sold into sex trafficking. If you know that there's a 50% chance that would happen, but this is your best option, imagine how bad the situation is at home, right? Like, if parents are sending their kids, or if kids are leaving by themselves, how bad is your situation at home? And people say, oh, I didn't think about that. Yes, because you don't think, you just like talk. You just go read a book, man. That's why I assigned Enrique's journey. Like, it kind of like makes you realize things. But at the end of the day, the back to this question, do you believe she regrets her decision to leave Enrique? The answer is yes, every single day. Why? I think a lot of parents realized, not to say that they were wrong, because at the moment you don't know what to do. These parents are like telling their kids, sleep on your stomach. Is that what the quote was? Sleep on your stomach, because if you sleep on your back, your stomach's gonna rumble all night because you haven't eaten in a day and a half. I don't have food. There's no work here. There's no place to get food. Sleep on your stomach and you'll be able to sleep better. So these parents are like, if my kid doesn't leave, if I don't leave, my kid is gonna die by Friday, and it's Tuesday today or something. He's gonna starve and die by Friday. Horrible death. Or I can send him, and there's like a 50% chance he'll make it. Somebody might adopt him. He might end up working, whatever. But it's like, that's the only chance I can save his life. It's the only chance I have. Otherwise, if I keep him here, Friday he's dead. Guaranteed he's dead. He might die, he might get raped if I send him, but then again, there's a chance that he might survive. So a lot of these parents send their kids, right? And Enrique's mother, towards the end of the book, I think, which you'll realize, is she says, like, one of my biggest regrets was sending him, because I lost, like, the only thing I had with my son, we didn't have food, we didn't have clothing, we didn't have nothing, but we had love. That's the only bond that we had with each other. And that was lost. I'm no longer his mother. He doesn't love me, not because of what I did, but just because of the separation. And I lost that love that we had for each other. And I regret that every day of my life. So a lot of people regret it. But I mean, it has to be done. At least he's alive, as opposed to have died of starvation, right? What are your thoughts on Mexico's wall blocking migration from Central America? Mexico wants to build a wall as well. They're all mad at the US because the US wants to build a wall, but hey, let's build a wall on the southern border. What are your thoughts on the possibility of deporting Central American migrants, so non-Mexicanos, and dumping them in Mexico, which is what the US does as well? All right, so here are the push-pull factors. What pulls people into the United States? U.S. laws and policies provide for unique treatment of unaccompanied children and families apprehended at the border. So this was true like a couple of years ago, and that's what we always think. Some of these kids are allowed to be released and remain in the country for long periods of time as they await the outcomes of immigration court hearings. In the last couple of years, we realized that, is this actually true? A lot of them actually disappear while they're stuck in those cages. Like, they get sold into, there's all these theories out there, right? All unaccompanied Central American children and families who have established a credible fear of return to their home are afforded a hearing in immigration court where they can apply for asylum or other forms of immigration relief. Wow, that's going to entice me to come to the United States, but that's total BS. That doesn't really happen. There are 474,000 pending cases as of January 2016, with the average case taking almost 700 days. Asylum can take up to 4 years to be resolved in some jurisdictions. And even if it gets resolved or you get hurt, or the wait is over after 700 days, there's a very, very high chance that you will not get granted asylum. So your only option is to hop the border and see if you can make it for yourself illegally. So all those people that say, well, do it right like my grandfather did. Read a book, educate yourself. That's the worst part about like social media. I could post the biggest BS story and everyone's gonna believe it. And then it gets shared and people believe everything, right? I'm done talking about that. People Facebook has been pissing me off lately. Anyway, push-pull factors. We're at the push. What pushes people out of El Salvador, for example? Let's see. El Salvador homicide rate increased sharply in 2015 to 104 murders per 100,000 population. The new highest rate worldwide. Honduras, which ranked first in 2014, has a homicide rate of 90 per 100,000. Central America is also experiencing the most severe drought in decades that has squeezed agricultural production and has hurt small farmers, so they have to leave and go find work. More than 3.5 million people are food insecure. They don't know when they're going to have their next meal. And the prisons are overcrowding. So why is Central America so violent? One is the overcrowding of prisons. And two is that in the last decade, the cities have grown rapidly. And sometimes that's a good thing or a bad thing. But in this case, it's a bad thing because it's in a disorganized manner because the government does not help. Governments have been unable to guarantee necessary state services to the entire urban dwelling community. Like where you live, you have running water. Where you live, you have electricity. It's up to you to pay it or not. If you don't want to pay it, then you're out in the streets and you're homeless. But even then, there are services so that you don't die of starvation. We have welfare. We have pantries. We have XYZ that is going to help you to be alive and survive. And in Central America, they have none of that. At least poor people have running water and a roof over their head, right? Even if it's in a shack. In Central America, the government does not provide any of that. What is Mexico's role in Central American violence? In 2014, the Mexican officials announced that they would use satellite imagery. This is a bunch of BS. Why don't you invest money in something else, in my opinion, to monitor railway lines running through Mexico towards its northern border in the United States. We're talking about El Tren or La Bestia, which is that train that basically a series of trains that runs from southern Mexico to northern Mexico that people take, riding on top. Not that they're buying a ticket and sitting in there. They're riding on top of the train or hanging on, taking it all the way to northern Mexico so they can. A variety of trains. You have to jump off here and get there. There's a thing you have to do, right? There's a plan that you have to make up. And you arrive in the United States. So they started having Mexican train raids, and this was a result of increased pressure from the United States. Migrants have been returning to more dangerous alternative routes because of these train raids. So they have to travel through woods and through jungles. They're exposed to animals, to police, to thieves, and the police mostly are the thieves, and narcs also, who trying to make a quick buck by selling somebody into the sex slave or something. Let's see. Let's talk about La Bestia for a second. Ferrocarriles Chiapas, Mayab, invest 150 million to improve the railway in the next 5 years, which means satellites, which we talked about, and fix the tracks to make the train faster. The tracks and the trains carry goods. Does it really matter how fast they get there? I know you could say, well, yeah, like I have a shoe that's made in Salvador, and I paid shipping and I want it in 6 days rather than 7. So it does not matter. That does not matter if these trains are faster or not, because the goods that are being shipped out is going to get there either way. And those faster railways maybe might save you a day. But what's the point of the faster railways? They say so we can send products faster. That's total BS. It's so that people can fall off and people are discouraged to jump on these trains. In 2014, in the year 2014, 66,000 children crossed the Mexico-US border. That was an 88% increase in child migrants from 2013, and a 412% increase in family migrants during the same period. So many kids are coming, so many families are crossing the border. That means that there's something happening that's totally wrong. Totally wrong. What's going on? A lot of it is because of the civil wars and the earthquakes and all that happened. Salvadorian Civil War in the US, 1980 to 1992. Many argue that the US intervention in El Salvador led to much terror for many Salvadorians due to its support of the notorious military. So Salvador was having a civil war, wasn't too much of a big deal until the United States came in and metió la pata donde no pertenecía. You know what that means? Like put their foot where it doesn't belong, like sticking their nose in places where it doesn't go. Some argue that the intervention of the United States was illegal. The United States promised to improve living conditions, and all those promises were broken. Um, much of this problem had to do with like exports and money and all that stuff. El Salvador's 98% of its income was due to the coffee trade, and all that money was reserved for only 2% of the population. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit about El Salvador and some of the articles that you have to read, like the gangs of El Salvador. The Mara Salvatrucha is actually a gang from the United States. We call it a Salvadorian gang, but just because it's made up of Salvadorians doesn't mean it's from El Salvador. What are we doing to people that we catch in the United States who maybe are undocumented, but are part of Mara Salvatrucha? We are sending them and deporting them back to El Salvador. So all the people that made their lives here as gang members, we're sending them back to El Salvador to be in their prisons. The prisons are overcrowded. And basically what's happening is the government, which you'll see in the documentaries that are posted later on, the prisons actually help to group all these gangs together. You know, gangs are so vicious that you can't have two rival gangs in the same prison. So then they put one over here and one over here and one over here. And what that happens is basically you just organized all the gangs for themselves, right? So that there will be less violence. And because the prisons are so overcrowded, you have to let criminals go on a daily basis. In other words, we're taking out our trash here in the United States and dumping it in El Salvador. What should we do instead? You could say, well, it's not our trash, man. Those are all Salvis, Salvatruchas, whatever you want to call them, right? Gang members. But we're spending so much money trying to build the wall, trying to like send people back. If you have programs that help these kids to get them off the streets, then you're going to solve that problem almost overnight, right? The reason that these gang members are getting into trouble is because they don't have a support at home, right? Because their parents are not at home, because they're off working, because they have to work 2-3 jobs so that they can feed their family. And you can say, well, that's their fault. If you keep saying those things, and maybe like you don't understand the way systemic, all this racism works, right? And how it works against the people. I had a friend of mine say, is that even a thing? Like, how can you say there's like systemic racism that works against Black people? And I said, do you not understand the history of our country? And he's like, give me one example of how the system is rigged against Black people. And I said, oh my goodness, I could give you like 10 examples. How can I, do you really not know? Do you really need an example? So I told him, well, what about the war on drugs in the 1980s? White people sniff cocaine, judges all the time, lawyers, whoever. If you're a white person caught with a line of cocaine, let's say you get on average like 6 months in prison or jail, whatever. Cocaine can also be used in other ways. Instead of a line of powder, you can also, before you actually like smash it in right there, you can actually like just cut a piece off before it's processed and smoke it as crack cocaine. right? It's a cheaper option. So what do you think poor communities like African American communities, black communities in New York, for example, or LA, what do you think they're gonna do? Smoke crack cocaine or do lines? One is obviously cheaper than the other. They're gonna do the crack cocaine. But the government is over here making laws that if you caught with crack cocaine, you get like 10 years in prison. And whereas like the white people who can afford the lines, they get a couple months or they get a fine. Like the system is rigged against them, right? And so when I told that to the guy, he was like, "Oh, well, then why are they doing drugs in the first place?" I said, "Oh my goodness, man. Oh my goodness. There's a lot of people that really don't understand how the system works." It's like, why are black people doing drugs? Did you not hear that white people, black people, everybody's doing drugs? But when white people do them, there's no consequences. And when black people do them, they go to jail for years. Don't talk about, well, then don't do drugs. Oh my goodness. Like, do you not realize that sometimes you're in the streets growing up? Like, I always give this example. Biggie, you all know Biggie, Christopher Wallace, the rapper. When his mom found out the lyrics he was singing in his rap song, she was like mind blown. She said, "No, no, no, my son Chris, like he goes to school. He's actually a good student. He comes home, he does his homework, Monday through Friday. That's what he does." She had no idea the experiences he was living on the way to school, while at school, on the way home from school, on the weekends when she was out at work, having to like go through this street or cut through that alley because you can't be caught in the middle of this gun fight, or you can't like cross this gangster's territory. Like, you have so many things that you have to navigate, and sometimes you're forced into selling drugs or forced into doing drugs. Like, sometimes it's not a choice. Like in Mexico, it's not a choice. You grow up selling drugs because that's what your dad does, that's what his uncles do, that's what your grandpa did, that's what the lawyer, the doctor, and the priest of the town also do, and the mayor. So to you, it's like normal. Like, it's not even a bad thing. you know it's just a broken system, and sometimes it's broken so hard that we don't even know it's broken, right? Educate yourself. Go read a book. you know Go what listen to a podcast. I don't know, whatever you need to do, right? So let's get back to this topic at hand. El Norte, as in the US, and the migration that happens. We need to understand why it happens. Make sure you watch the documentary Which Way Home, and it'll sort of explain the experience on the train. It doesn't talk about why people really leave. It just talks about their experiences on the train. So I hope you have a good rest of the day. I'm stopping sharing my screen. You let me know if you have any questions.